Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 14, verse 41. Śrī Śuka uvāca abhiṣṭūya bhūmānaṁ triḥ parikramya pādayoḥ natvābhīṣṭaṁ jagad-dhātā sva-dhāma pratyapadyata. Śrī Śuka uvāca abhiṣṭūya bhūmānaṁ triḥ parikramya pādayoḥ natvābhīṣṭaṁ jagat-dhātā sva-dhāma pratyapadyata. Śrī Śuka uvāca abhiṣṭūya bhūmānam triḥ parikramya pādayoḥ natvābhīṣṭaṁ jagat-dhātā sva-dhāma pratyapadyata. Śrī Śukadeva uvāca. Śrī Śukadeva Gosvāmī said, Iti, thus, abhiṣṭūya, offering praise, bhūmānaṁ, to the unlimited Supreme Lord, triḥ, three times, parikramya, circumambulating, pādayoḥ, at his feet, natvā, bowing down, abhiṣṭam, desired, jagat, of the universe, dhātā, the creator, sva-dhāma, to his personal abode, pratyapadyata, returned. Translation and purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Śukadeva Gosvāmī said, having thus offered his prayers, Brahmā circumambulated his worshipable Lord, the unlimited personality of Godhead, 3 times, and then bowed down at his lotus feet. The appointed creator of the universe then returned to his own residence. Purport. Although Lord Brahmā had prayed to take birth as a blade of grass in Vrindavan, or even in the areas surrounding Vrindavan, Lord Krishna, by his silent response to Brahma's prayers, indicated that Brahmā should return to his own abode. First, Brahmā had to complete his personal devotional service of universal creation. Then he could come to Vrindavan and get the mercy of the inhabitants there. In other words, a devotee should always be attentive to executing his personal devotional service properly. This is more important than trying to live in the Lord's abode. Translation again. Śukadeva Gosvāmī said, having thus offered his prayers, Brahmā circumambulated his worshipable Lord, the unlimited personality of Godhead, 3 times, and then bowed down at his lotus feet. The appointed creator of the universe then returned to his own residence. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. So, we know from the previous cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam that in the waters of devastation, Lord Narayan lied down, and from his navel came a lotus, upon which Lord Brahma appeared. There was darkness everywhere. He searched to find out his source, but couldn't find him. So after hearing the transcendental sound vibration of tapa, he began to perform austerity, and then by the grace of the Lord, by his mercy only, he was able to have darshan of the Lord. And that darshan was the Lord lying down upon the ocean. So in the Stala Puranas, Stala Shastras, it's mentioned that at that time, a murti was given to Brahma, and that's the Ranganath deity that's still being worshipped today. Lord Brahma worshipped that deity of Ranganath in his abode in Satyalok. And then he gave that to the son of Vivishvan in the Sun dynasty, that's Ikshvaku, who we've all heard of from the Bhagavad-Gita. And Ikshvaku worshipped that beautiful deity of Ranganath. Now Brahmaji, at the end of Satya Yuga, he again performed tapasya, and he had a special prayer to the Lord. He wanted to take part in the Lord's pastimes and take the part of the Lord and his devotees stepping on his head, getting the dust of their lotus feet. So Sri Krishna told Brahma at that time that he would grant his desire, and he should take his appearance in the land of Braja as a mountain. And that mountain is where Vrishabhanupura is, that's Brahma Parvat. If anyone goes to Barsana, you'll see there, amazingly, a deity of Lord Brahma. Although he's not supposed to be worshipped anywhere because it's a spiritual world, he's worshipped there. And he's also worshipped just down the road here at Chaturmukha, the village named after him, which is now called Chomuha or Chomu. Deep in the forest, now they've made a road and it's not so deep anymore, but it used to be very isolated, that small place where Brahmaji actually offered these prayers. It's right in our neighborhood. So Brahmaji, he took birth there as the mountain with the 4 peaks. There's Bangar, you go up 285 steps. That's where Radharani's temple is. There's Mangar, you go up 251 steps to that peak. There's Dangar, and then on the other mountain peak, Vishnu or Krishna's mountain, which is dark, there's Vilasgar. So those are the 4 peaks. And just according to his desire, and according to Krishna's mercy, Krishna and Radharani and all of the inhabitants there of Braj, they step on his head. Lord Shiva, he wanted to be close to Krishna and Balaram, so just 8 kilometers away in Nandishwarapura, Lord Shiva, he appeared as the hill of Nandishwara, and he's worshipped there so that he can always get the Charanamrita of Krishna and Balaram. So the demigods, they prayed to take part in the pastimes of the Supreme Lord here in Vrindavan. These 40 prayers that were offered to Brahma are perfect in every respect. Out of the 40 prayers, 21 of the prayers glorify the Lord's devotees. It's more than half. 11 of the prayers describe the unfortunate condition of the different types of non-devotees, the speculators, the jnanis, the philosophers, the scientists, and the outright demons. and the unfortunate materialists who do not understand that the Supreme Lord is the creator of everything. He describes the devotees, the non-devotees, then first of all he describes the beauty of the Lord, he describes the glories of the different names of the Lord, he describes the Leela of the Lord, the Guna of the Lord, the avatars of the Lord. 15 of the slokas describe the mercy of the Lord. And only 4 of the slokas, after fully describing the devotees, he describes his implorable position, lamentable condition for being so offensive. When Krishna, according to Jiva Goswami, was only 3 years old, this is amazing that a 3-year-old could do such a fantastic feat. When he was just 3 years old, that was when he killed and liberated Aghasura. And then we know that that same day, Brahmā decided to play a trick, and he stole the boys and the calves just for a moment. And Krishna, for that 1 year, now Brahmā in his prayers, almost towards the end, he says, I can't understand because you gave yourself to Putana and her family members, which is Aga and Baka, simply because they pretended to be devotees. So now, what do you have to give to your devotees who have given everything to you? And then he answers that question. He says that you imitate the material life and you wander amongst your devotees just to increase the ecstatic varieties of enjoyment of your surrendered devotees. So what Krishna does is, and what he did for that whole year was, and what he's doing throughout all of his pastimes here in Braj, because Brahmā, he has full understanding who Krishna is as his Supreme Lord. He is play acting. He's playing a role of a cowherd boy. Now Brahmaji in the 8th chapter, when Brahmā was sitting in meditation at the shore of the milk ocean, and he received telepathically the message from Narayan that Narayan told him to inform all the demigods and their wives to take birth, to take part in his pastimes. He would soon be appearing. So one of the Vasus, Drona, and his wife, Dara, this is all described in the Bhagavatam, 8th chapter, they had a special request to expand and manifest to the world the childhood pastimes of the Lord in Braja. So Brahmaji gave them that benediction. They would become Nanda and Yashoda. So Brahmaji was fully aware of who this child Krishna was, because he had given the permission of Nanda and Yashoda to become their parents. But during this year, he was playing a deception, a trick, upon the residents of Vrindavan. Now at 3 years old, Krishna was still in Kumara Leela. And the prominent rasa in Kumara Leela is Vatsalya rasa. So in this deception, he became the calves and the cowherd boys just to increase the bliss of those in Vatsalya rasa. The boys were sleeping. Temporarily, that Sakya Ras was in dormant stage. In fact, Krishna wasn't experiencing the bliss that he usually had, interacting with his own expansions, because he wanted to play with his real friends who were sleeping for that 1 year. But just to increase this Vatsalya Ras, he played this deception. Now, when we perform in any drama, the first rule in drama is that whichever role you play, you have to completely forget your own personality and become the person that you're playing the role of. So Krishna, in this role, because the Vatsalya Ras was so thick with love, he forgot who he was. And he actually became a cowherd boy, completely under the control of Mother Yasoda and Nanda Maharaj. He forgot that he was a Supreme Lord, and he was their little son. So now when Brahma comes, Brahma appears, he's looking this way and that way, glancing. He's afraid. He knows that he's committed an offense, and he's hiding because, imagine this, Lord Brahma, he's an employee of the Lord. He's an appointed officer in this universe. Now, any employee who sees that his boss has some treasure, if that employee has the audacity and the impudence to steal that treasure, and then he gets caught, he's afraid. He knows he's going to get in trouble. He might lose his job. Now, that might happen, for instance, when Indra had, he has so many different assistants. He had an umbrella carrier named Kamuda. And after Indra killed Vritrasura, he had to perform an Asvamedha sacrifice. And Kamuda, he was very attracted to that horse. He stole the horse and went down to Atala Loka and was riding on the horse. The Maruts captured him and took him back to Indra because the Maruts and Indra are friends. And Indra cursed him to become Keshi. For crores of years, he had to become a horse. So you're in big trouble if you steal something that belongs to your employer, your master. And Brahma, he knew the whole history. He was afraid he was going to get in trouble. He might get cursed by the Supreme Lord. So when Krishna, seeing Brahma's humility, his embarrassment, his shame, and Brahma was perfectly silent, Krishna then, again, by his free will, by his mercy, he gave special darshan to Brahma. First, he showed him all the cowherd boys and the calves. Then he had them reappear as the four-armed Vishnu forms. Then he had all the universes appear there right in front of Brahma. And then, again, he was Krishna all alone with just a morsel of food in his hand. And Brahma, he was jolted with astonishment, and he was stunned in transcendental bliss. So when Krishna saw him like that, he put his yoga maya over him, and he had him forget temporarily the darshan that he had had. Just like a dead man, he stood up. And just like when we're standing in front of the deities, we know the potency of the deities, that the pure devotee has called the deities here to accept our service, and we're completely insignificant in front of them. So Brahma, he was just like that in front of the Supreme Lord, little Krishna. He felt himself to be just like a clay doll in front of a village deity. And he was silent. With tears in his eyes then, he began to speak. And these prayers are the perfection of poetry. Now we know that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he loved the poetry of Jayadev Gosvāmī. Most of us, we're not qualified to read Gita Govinda, but there's an introduction to the Gita Govinda that Jayadev Gosvāmī wrote, where he defines what good poetry is. All of the prayers of Brahmaji fit into that good poetry. Jayadev Gosvāmī, he says that there are two aspects that make a poem or any type of poetry or hymn or prayers perfect. And that is Shabda and Artha. Shabda Artha in Sanskrit, Shabdarth means the word-for-word translations. In poetry, it has four different qualities, the Shabda and the Artha. One is, it has to be sweet, madhurya. The other is, it has to be komala, soft. The other is, it has to be kanta, it has to be very pleasant. And most important, it has to glorify the Supreme Lord. Now, we heard about this in the very first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, when Vyasadeva was lamenting. He didn't feel any bliss after writing all the Vedas. And his Guru Maharaj came to him, Narada Muni. And Narada Muni explained to him that any literature that does not glorify the Supreme Lord, it's a place of pilgrimage for the crows. The Paramahamsas will never go there. But that literature, even if it's imperfectly composed, if it glorifies the Supreme Lord, that can remove all the sins of the listener. Now, when writing, when speaking, we always have a vishaya, and our vishaya is always Krishna. That's the subject of what we're speaking about. And in this circumstance, for Brahmā, his vishaya was Krishna, and then you have a prayojana. A prayojana means, what is the goal? Why am I speaking? Why am I even saying anything? His prayojana was to get brajabasa. He wanted to live in Vrindavan and get that dust of the lotus feet of the devotees and Krishna. And the sambandha, how do you connect the vishaya and the prayojana? Well, that sambandha, Brahmaji describes in his prayers to be bhakti, that bhakti rasa. So Śukadeva Gosvāmī, the first thing, because he has to, when a writer writes something, he has to attract the audience. So the first thing he did was he described what bad writing is, what bad prayers and hymns are. He said, he gave the names of some of his contemporaries. We don't have to know the names, it was a long time ago, but one of them was a minister, and he could write so many beautiful poetries to please the king, but the shabda was very nice, it was sweet, it was soft, it was pleasant, but there was no meaning to it. It was just to please the king. There was no bhakti, no rasa. So that's useless writing. Then there was a great poet. He could write things so clearly, eloquently, just a few words. But his meanings were so cryptic that nobody could understand what he was writing about. Because the artha was not clear, he is also rejected. For instance, in Japanese poetry, you have haikus. You can only have a certain number of syllables, and we've all heard of the clapping with one hand. It's cryptic. It's obtruse. Who can understand it? So that is also rejected. If despite the poetic nature, you can't understand what the poet is saying, you reject it. Then you have the śruti-dhāras. Śruti-dhāras means they'll read something, they can immediately recite it. Sometimes we have speakers, they'll recite so many slokas, and the audience is just trying, if they don't know Sanskrit, they don't know what the Śruti-dhāra is saying. So they're lost. Again, there's no artha. The bhakti might be there, but you have to keep the audience in awe of what you're saying. So that's also rejected. Then he spoke about one poet who wrote beautiful, beautiful love stories, and it amused the people so much. But these love stories were material ras, so that's also rejected. Finally, he gave himself as an example. He said, when you read this Gita Govinda, you will have all the best qualities of poetry, plus you will have the supreme artha of Madhurya Ras, because he was writing about Madhurya Ras. So, and he described that I'm not actually writing, it's Krishna writing. Prabhupada would also say that about his works. So that bhakti ras, that along with sweetness, softness, and pleasantness, they must be there. And Brahmaji, in his prayers, he has all of those qualities. According to the acharyas, not only Narottam Das Thakur, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Brahmaji, all of our Vaishnava acharyas, there are 10 types of prayers that one can offer to the Lord. We can read all those different types of prayers in Prarthana by Narottam Das Thakur. Some of them are lamentation for our fallen condition. Some of them are prayers to reside in the Dham. Some of them are prayers to become devotees. Some of them are prayers to attain spontaneous love. Some of them are pure glorification of the Lord or the Lord's devotees or the Guru. Now, all of those 10 different types of prayers were mentioned by Brahmā in his 40 verses. Everything about these prayers is perfect. But even better than Lord Brahmā as a poet, and one who has the shabda and the artha perfectly, is Lord Sri Krishna. We'll take one example. That we have that sloka that Brahmā spoke, that our desires are like thieves, and our homes are like prisons, and our family attachments are like foot shackles. It's a very succinct, something we can easily remember, and we can apply it in our own life. So maybe by next year, or the next 2 years, we'll come to the 11th canto, the Bhagavad-Gita. Now, Krishna, because he had time then, he only had half an hour to speak to Arjuna, although everything he said was perfect, according to Shabda and Artha, but he had more time to talk to Uddhava. So he tells stories to Uddhava to explain what he said very succinctly in the Bhagavad-Gita. So Krishna tells a story that exactly exemplifies Brahma's short prayer. He talks about a family of pigeons. He said there was a father pigeon and a mother pigeon, and they loved each other dearly. And they had little baby pigeons. And they would take so much pleasure in hearing the chirping, watching them jump and try to fly. And their whole center of life was how to maintain these little baby birds. They would fly out together and look for food, come back, feed their babies. And one day while they were flying looking for food, the little baby birds were on the ground and a hunter came. He easily captured them in his net. And when the mother and father came back, the mother, out of her intense affection, she jumped right into the net with her babies. And the father, he was thinking, I've performed no pious activities in this life. Therefore, the purpose of my life is now being taken from me. My dharma, my artha, my kama, everything is dead now if I don't have my beloved wife and my little children. My wife and I were the perfect couple. This is the pigeon speaking. Perfect soulmates. She was completely submissive to me. Any of my desires she fulfilled. And my children were our very life. So thinking in this way about his beloved wife and his little children, he became struck, he couldn't move. And the hunter immediately was able to capture him too. The hunter took them all home to his house, which was the abode of death. So Krishna, he knows how to speak in the most perfect way. So both by beauty in the shabda, and so that we can understand the meaning of what Krishna is trying to teach us. So Brahmaji, he was wondering, why is Krishna silent? I'm trying my best, begging for his compassionate forgiveness, but he's not saying anything. Now this silence is described. First of all, Krishna describes silence in the Bhagavad-Gita. He says, Monam chaivasmi guyanam. He says, of sacred things I am silence. Now Krishna, playing his role as a little cowherd boy, by that time he was 4 years old, because the whole 1 year had passed. He was still in Kumara Lila as a little child. He was thinking, as Brahma was speaking, he was thinking, we are cowherds. We know the truth. What is the truth? That what goes on in the spiritual world? This love of the cowherd villagers. You are Brahma. You know nothing of our life. I have nothing to say to you. Because Brahma did not have that spontaneous love that the inhabitants of Vrindavan had. So Krishna had nothing to speak to him. Another description of silence is monam samati lakshanam. Monam samati lakshanam means, samati means when you agree. If someone is telling you something and you don't have any objections, then you're silent because you agree with what they're saying. So everything that Brahmā was saying, and all of his prayers as well, to become a resident, even as a blade of grass, Krishna was listening, and he was giving his consent as well, with this silence, because he made no objection to it. So then, if that case, why didn't Brahmā just immediately become a blade of grass? No, because it's described in the Vedanta Sutra, and this is what's being described in this purport, this quotation from the Vedanta Sutra, that if one is an appointed officer, he must perform his duties until that post is completely fulfilled. We had that example with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his life. He wanted to give up his post and just live in Navadvip and develop Mayapur. And the government would not permit him. So he went to live there anyway. He got transferred. He made his home in Swarupganj. But the government found his service to be so important that they built a railway line going all the way from Krishnanagar to Swarupganj, just so Bhaktivinoda Thakur could come to his office every morning. So Krishna, in his silence, he was thinking that if you don't perform your universal activities as Lord Brahmā, as the creator, there'll be havoc in the universe. Who will take your post? So you have to go back, perform your duties. When your duties are completed, then you can come and I will fulfill all your desires that you reside in Vrindavan, and you'll get the dust of the lotus feet of the devotees. So this also in our service, and this is what's being said in the last sentence of this purport. Of course, we can take the example of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because he continued with his service, but he also lived in the holy Dham. So we have that opportunity. Those of us who are here, we have appointed duties, and we might want to immediately go back to Godhead, dance with Krishna, play with Krishna, but we have responsibilities here. They may not be exactly what we want to do in the spiritual world. I mean, how many computers are there in the spiritual world? How many account offices are there in the spiritual world? No, it's not exactly what we want to do, but we have to perform our duties. And then, when our duties are completed, when we've passed all of our knowledge on to the next person who's going to be in that post, then we can be assured that we'll certainly go back to Godhead and all of our desires, our spiritual desires, because Krishna, he comes also to increase the spiritual desires of his devotees. They'll all be fulfilled in the spiritual world. So we have a glorious future in front of us, and now our position is, just as Lord Brahmā, he offered his prayers, he offered his obeisances, he performed parikramya to the Supreme Lord. We have that opportunity every single day. Offer prayers, offer obeisances, offer parikramya, and then we start our day and we do our service. This is the lesson that we can learn from this wonderful pastime. How Brahmā, even though he was offensive, he was impudent, he was arrogant, he had such audacity to commit an offense against his master, he was forgiven by the Lord, and he was assured that after his duties were completed, he would go back to Godhead. So we also can maintain that hope in our service. Now, this wonderful place of Barsana, Vrishabhanupura, we know that, and we've heard it many times in the earlier chapters, Devamida, he had two wives. One was a Vaishya, one was a Kshatriya. And from those two wives, he had Parjanya Maharaj and he had Surasena. Surasena, he was the king of this whole Mathura area is called Surasena also. And Parjanya, being the half Vaishya, he was made chieftain of the Braja area. And he came here to live with his wife. He had 5 sons, the middle one being Nanda Maharaj. Now at the same time, because Parjanya Maharaj lived then in Nandagram, at the same time, there was another chieftain of Vaishya. His name was Mahiban, and he had a son named Vrishabhanu. So Vrishabhanu and Nanda Maharaj, they grew up together, and they made a pact of friendship in their early childhood, that they would be friends for life. So when this Keshi, who we just heard about, he was roaming around, this was before even Kamsa and all that, he was roaming as a demoniac horse. He happened to come in the area of Nandishwara, where Parjanya Maharaj was living. And when Parjanya Maharaj saw this wild horse, this demon, he thought, this is not a safe place for my family anymore. So he took his family to Mahavan. Because Nanda Maharaj went also with his father, Vrishabhanu, because Vrishabhanu's Sasural, that means the Nani and the Nana and the Nani, they lived in Rawal. So Vrishabhanu, he decided he would take his family there also. So therefore you have Vrishabhanu then in Rawal, which again is very close to Mahavan, and the 2 friends, they raised their family together in those places. Then when Kansa began his persecutions, and Nanda Maharaj, Upananda, and all the cowherd men decided that it's much too dangerous here in Mahavan anymore, and the trees have all been eaten by the animals, it's time for us to go back to Vrindavan. So therefore, they packed up in one day, they were nomadic cowherds, they packed up in one day everything. By bullock cart, they came here to glorious Chatikara. They made their round with all their bullock carts. They kept the cows and the women and the children in the center. They were on the outside to protect against wild animals. And Nanda Maharaj began to reestablish his kingdom there at Nandishwar Parvat. Make the houses, make everything nice for the families. So Vrishabhanu, he decided to come back also. He made his camp in Basati, and Radha and Krishna, as little children, they would meet in Ral. And he built his place again at his father's place in Barsana. So in that way, now we have the Kumara Leela, where Krishna is concentrating on increasing the bliss of Vatsalya Ras. After the killing of Aga, and this is tricky because Krishna killed Aga when he was 3 years old, but the boys didn't inform the inhabitants of Vrindavan about this killing until Krishna was 4 years old. So somewhere in between that time, Krishna had been completely under the control of Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj in Kumarya Leela. Now that Aga had been killed, he wasn't under their control anymore. He wanted to be with his boyfriends. He wouldn't let Mother Yashoda bathe him anymore. He had the boys bathe him. He would come and just offer respects to his parents. And he wanted to do what all cowherd children want to do. He wanted to herd the cows. He didn't want to herd just the calves anymore. And the cows wanted Krishna to herd them. So when the cowherd man would let out the cows to go into the forest, the cows would just stand there. And it wouldn't be until Krishna would go in front of them that they would start moving to the forest. So these are the beautiful pastimes that take place right here. You can walk and see right in Chatikara. These beautiful pastimes when Krishna from age 4 to 6 is in the Poganda Leela, and he most favors the Sakya Rasa at that time. And we'll be hearing now the next chapter because we just have a few more verses in this chapter. Next chapter is when Krishna kills Dhenukasura. So we go back to Jayadeva Gosvāmī. Jayadeva Gosvāmī, now in his introduction, when he's proven to his audience that you should listen to my poetry, because I have the perfect shabda and the perfect artha, which is Krishna, he doesn't go right into Madhurya Ras. No, his first poem is Dasavatar Stotra. And that poem is so important that Prabhupada has us sing the stuti to Nrsingadev after every single arti. Now, after that particular sloka, the next sloka, it starts out, Chalayasi Vikramane Bali Adbhuta Vamana. Now, Chalayasi, chal. Chal means trick. You tricked with your steps, Bali, in the wonderful form of a dwarf. So that deception was there. Why was Krishna deceptive in the form of a dwarf? Because he favored his devotee Indra. He appeared as Upendra, the younger brother of Indra. And he deceived his devotee Bali to take everything from him and give it to Indra. But not only did he take everything from Bali, he then stayed with Bali permanently in Sutala Loka. So by his deception, he was able to satisfy both Indra and Bali. So this deception is glorified by the poets. Now Krishna in his deception, when he roams in his spiritual body amongst the Brijbasis, that is considered the highest pleasure, both for him and his devotees. Because the devotees in Vrindavan have that special quality that Brahmaji talked about. They have spontaneous love that you won't find anywhere else in any of the other abodes of the Lord. So Brahmaji was praying for that spontaneous love. And just like anything else, if you want darshan, if you want mercy, if you want love, these things cannot come to us by our own endeavors. They come to us when the Lord decides to give them to us. And when the Lord sees that we're performing our duties as given to us by our spiritual master, because Brahmaji speaks about the spiritual master, it's only through him that we can get this knowledge. When we perform our duties nicely, then, as he says in the 8th verse, it's our claim that we get the mercy of the Lord. So all of us in our service, we should take it as the direct mercy of the Lord that we've given this particular service in the Holy Dham. If we perform our service nicely, it is our rightful claim that we will get the mercy of the Lord. And our spiritual desires, however we wish to serve the Lord, will certainly be fulfilled by the Supreme Lord simply by performing our services as given by the spiritual master. Okay, are there any questions? Yes, Prabhu.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was hearing from Sarvabhauma with the Vedanta, he remained silent the whole way through. He didn't object. So maybe you were mentioning that by remaining silent, he accepted, that Krishna was accepting Brahma's words, whereas Lord Chaitanya was remaining silent for Sarvabhauma, which I didn't mean he was actually accepting. Sarvabhauma was included in the Vedanta Sutra, right?
No, because when Sarvabhauma asked him, why are you silent? He says, because nothing you're saying makes any sense. That was his response. He said, I understand the Vedanta Sutra perfectly, but what you're saying doesn't make any sense. So out of respect, he remained silent. But then when he was inquired by his superior, then he explained why he was silent. There's a question in the back.
Hare Krishna, Mataji, thank you for such a gush of nectar. I have a question. It's an insignificant question. Like in the purport, Prabhupada is saying that first Brahma had to complete his personal devotional service of universal creation. Then he could come to Vrindavan. So I just wanted to understand, whether for my understanding, that this lila happened in Vrindavan here. So there was still some creation left to be done? Or is he talking about creating more other universes? What exactly?
He was managing the universe. He had a lot of devotees who were praying to him, both demons and devotees. They were praying to him. For instance, Ravana was praying to Brahmaji, and it was Brahmaji who gave him all of his benedictions. So in his post as the creator, just like any father, he has to take care of his children. So because he created all the living entities, he had to maintain that, he had to see that they were all performing their duties properly. And those who tried to supplicate him with tapasya and prayers, he had to answer to their prayers. Many demons, many devotees, they would pray to Lord Brahmā for different benedictions. So as the father of the entire universe, he had a big responsibility because all the living entities were his children. So he couldn't abandon his children and become a brahmachari. So no more questions today? Oh, here's a question, okay.
Hare Krishna, thank you. Mother, you told that like Brahmaji's post was empty or there was nobody like to manage the universe at that time. But we also heard from previous classes that when Brahmaji went back to see the children, when he went back, then he saw some other Brahma was sitting on his post. We heard this from
Vaishnava Maharaj, yes. Yeah. I don't know where he got this story. I haven't read it so far anywhere. You have to ask Maharaj.
Thank you. Could you elaborate a little bit more when you say when we perform our duty, we can have a rightful claim for mercy?
Yes. That's described in the 8th chapter. In the 8th sloka. I'll just read it to you because Brahma says it best. 9. Okay. Number 8. My dear Lord, one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. So that's dayabhak. So when we're offering respectful obeisances with our heart, words, and body, that means service, that means devotional service, then we can expect the mercy of the Lord. We had one personal experience with Prabhupada. We had responsibility in America, wanted to come here. And Prabhupada wrote a letter. He said, nothing should be done hastily and haphazardly. That first you have to train. When someone is trained for your post, then you can come. So in all of our services, especially now we're getting older, can't do as much as we'd like to do. Not you, me. So it's our duty at this time, and this is what Srila Prabhupada tried to do by creating the GBC in 1970. He wanted them to take over the managerial responsibilities of the society, and he personally trained them. He would have each manager, each GBC, there were 12 GBCs at that time. 1 month, each GBC would travel with him so that he would see how Prabhupada dealt with managerial concerns. And then when he wanted to complete, we heard about that, I think Prithu told the story, Karandar had one of the letters in his pocket, and Prabhupada said, what is it that? And it was a letter to Prabhupada that he was going to respond. So there were different times when Prabhupada realized that the devotees weren't quite ready yet to take over full management. So Prabhupada, up to the end practically, was still assisting in the management of the society, just to train his disciples. So it's also, our generation is going now. It's our responsibility, whatever we learn from Srila Prabhupada, personally, or by reading his books many, many times, by hearing from the other senior devotees, we have to pass that on to the junior devotees. When I first became a devotee, Prabhupada would give us an instruction. He would tell us, go to the colleges and lecture. So if Prabhupada writes a personal instruction, you would naturally you would think, well, you would ask the person who gave the instruction how to do it. But no, that wasn't the way to do it. Prabhupada would give an instruction, and then the devotees would consult with the other devotees. How are you doing it? How do I do this? How do I do that? And they would learn from each other. Prabhupada would say, consult your GBC. So we have to learn in the association of devotees how to perform devotional service. Because if the Guru gives an order, and, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? I'm having so much trouble. He'll say, okay, forget it. So when a Guru gives an order, you learn from your seniors and from those who are doing similar things how to carry out that order in a pleasant fashion for the pleasure of your spiritual master. You don't keep bothering your Guru, well, this way, that way, I'm having trouble. No. You learn how to do it and you give him the results. Here it is. So this is our responsibility now. We have to train others, whatever little bit we've learned. And just as Brahmā, he got to be a whole mountain. So he could get the dust of the lotus feet. Radharani was living right on his head. What greater mercy is that? So we don't know what's awaiting us. We just have to perform our duties properly now with our heart, our body, and our words. Okay. Hare Krishna.